Good morning, one last time. It is the 5th day of January 2024, 5 days into January. How are you doing? I hope you are well. This is going to be another short video. We're going to talk about Gaza. We're going to talk about Iran. We're going to talk about Iraq. We're going to talk about Syria. We're going to talk about Russia and China, South Africa, India. We're going to talk about BRICS. Let's just check and see what my focus is doing today. It always seems to be changing a little bit. Here we go. Perfect. The attack on the procession, the memorial service, the 4-year anniversary of General Soleimani's murder by U.S. Trump generals 4 years ago. The attack on that is people are ascribing that to be something to do with Gaza. Even I thought that that has to do with that. And that was Israel's attempt to bring Iran into it and expand the war. And it's in all likelihood part of it. They are now, this is something that it slipped my mind when I was talking about it the first time. I believe it was MEK, and I assumed that they would just toss MEK under the bus. No, they wouldn't do that. Instead, they are claiming it was done by Daesh or ISIS, of course. The Israeli State Intelligence Services is what I like to call them. ISIS or Daesh that did this. For some strange reason, they lashed out at these other Muslims. Daesh did, for no apparent fucking reason. But that's what they say. ISIS is us. We made ISIS. There's an article from the New York Times talking about this. But I put this image up in here. I put this image together, and I included this in the little clip I did from the article. Daesh is made in the United States. That's us. Clearly that's a fucking propaganda poster that we put that was professionally done and put out for us, probably done by Rita Katz. That looks like they're set, green screen. They have the ground done up like this, and of course they have that on the fucking green screen behind them. As you can see, this is clearly, if you look at them, they're clearly in front of a goddamn green screen. So this is probably Rita Katz with her fucking site intelligence services. And they produced a lot of the ISIS, quote-unquote, Daesh, quote-unquote, fake beheading videos back in the day. Of course, I added the CIA fucking emblems next to them. So this is Daesh, this is Al-Qaeda, this is ISIS. Why do I say this has nothing to do with, or very little to do with, at least little to do with, Gaza? Well, it fits. The timing is perfect. They can use Gaza as cover. But you have to understand something. Daesh claimed responsibility for terrorist bombings. I'm sorry, it's not New York Times, it's Press TV. Daesh has claimed responsibility for 2 explosions that killed at least 84 people and wounded scores at a memorial for top anti-terror commander, General Qasem Soleimani, in the southeastern Iranian city of Kerman. Okay, so there you go. Daesh has claimed fucking responsibility for it. ISIS is our, Daesh is another name for ISIS. ISIS is our fucking proxy army, destabilization army. If you go to pull up, and you can go look on my website, and I've got stuff for this under Daesh and all this shit, and ISIS. And if you go and look up unconventional and irregular warfare campaigns and handbooks, they explain how we'll go into other countries. We'll pick up small, disaffected, powerless groups. we'll talk to them, and the fixers will go in and they'll fucking tell them about, we're going to pump money into your system, into your group here. We're going to give you power. And then once we get the destabilization campaign successful, we'll put you and yours in power to serve our interests from the West. This is a typical thing that we've done for many, many, many decades, unfortunately. And this is how things like the MEK comes around, and PKK, and of course the glorious Kurds. This is, of course, how the Contras got started. Al-Qaeda, for instance, the Mujahideen. This is what we do. And Daesh, ISIS, is the same thing. Barack Obama needed justification for going back into Iraq and bombing because he had just been forced to pull out in 2011, if you recall, because that's the deal that Bush had saddled him with, and the people in Iraq said, no, screw you. We want you to fuck out. This is not an occupation. This is our country now. We're going to run it. Fucking Saddam is gone, so out you go. So he had to live up to that fucking deal. Well, he didn't want to because there was a thing called the General Military Council for the Iraqi Revolutionaries. That were the Baathists. That were a lot of the generals under Saddam. And they had scattered when we came in and overthrew the country illegally. But then they were reconstituting themselves, building back up in secret and talking and getting their fucking soldiers back together. After we left, that left a power vacuum, and the General Military Councils for the Iraqi Revolutionaries were going to fill that power vacuum, and they were on their way to Baghdad. They had Baghdad nearly surrounded. They had taken a lot of the country back, and we couldn't allow that to happen. I mean, shit, they stole that fucking country fair and square under the Bush administration. I'd be damned if Obama was going to lose it for big business. So ISIS started making these fucking bullshit, fake fucking videos, many of them produced by Rita Katz at the site, SITE. That's a bullshit fucking Mossad-linked disinformation propaganda publishing house. Where she would get these videos from ISIS or Daesh and then sell them to the news to use to gin up support for Barack Obama, President Peace Prize, to go back into Iraq and bomb the shit out of fucking Iraqis who were trying to take their country back from our goddamn puppets. That was Daesh. That was ISIS. And then, of course, we brought it into Syria for other purposes. We'll get to Syria in a second. Now, fast forward. We have a problem. We have a problem with what's called the world island. Back in the day, a guy by the name of Brzezinski, Mika Brzezinski's daddy, by the way. Brzezinski, who was an advisor to Carter and was very well placed, understood that the real power to control the world, you had to control what's called the world island. You had to control that central hub, and that central hub is basically the Middle East. You need to control the oil, you need to control the energy resources. And Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, all of these areas, this whole area, you needed control of that. That was the central hub, and from there your power could, expand. That's exactly what's happening here. Everyone knows that. Everyone understands that. That's the fucking fight. Well, I think what happened in Iraq, there were attacks that just took place in Iraq near Baghdad. The U.S. took out some PMU fucking leadership that were drifting off of the fucking farm, so to speak. That pissed off the Iraqis. The Iraqis are not, they were supposed to be still in bed with us, the ones we left behind. But they're not. They're getting closer and closer to Iran because China has mediated reconciliation between Saudi Arabia on the Sunni side and Iran on the Shiite side. And so that could to the detriment of our fucking masters of the universe, that could create a unity in the Middle East that hadn't existed for a long time. Because for one reason, we like to ferment discord between them to keep them broken up, like we did with the state of Yugoslavia, to keep them broken up in smaller factions and weaker factions rather than coming together and be stronger. That's why we like breaking up big countries. That's why we broke up fucking Yugoslavia. But they're talking about doing the same thing with Ukraine. Okay, so how does this equate to, Scott, you're telling me this has got very little to do, almost nothing to do with Gaza. It's got something to do with Gaza in that because of what's happening in Gaza, they've decided to push the button on the world island. But they're pushing the button on the world island not only because of Gaza, but because the world island is becoming unified against us and signing up with BRICS. Both Iraq and Iran are now looking to, with the BRICS, the recent BRICS expansion they're talking about, are looking to fucking sign on with the BRICS nations, which are a continuum, is that the right word I'm looking for? A collection of nation states that don't want to be ruled by Western fucking influence. They don't want to be ruled by our masters of the universe, under the control of the almighty fucking dollar. Iran, a week before Daesh decides to, out of nowhere, attack this procession, this parade for the celebration of the life of Soleimani. Right before, so out of the blue, Daesh decides to do this, Russia and Iran had entered into an agreement to start doing their trade off the U.S. dollar and on their own currency. That's big, because when they start doing their own trade off the U.S. dollar as the global currency, then the power of the U.S. dollar and the power of their influence and the masters of the universe influence dwindles remarkably. They are losing fucking Iran. They are losing clearly the other BRICS nations. But BRICS is expanding now, and they are going to include, they are targeting specifically the world island, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and United Arab Emirates, but also Iraq. So what happens? Now there's a drone strike in Syria, supposedly from some obscure Daesh-like fucking group based out of fucking Iraq. And there were some U.S. contractors injured east of fucking Syria in the greater Kurdistan project area, around the oil fields where we're stealing the fucking oil from the fucking Syrian people. And that's who we're stealing the oil from. It's not from Assad. We're stealing the oil from the Syrian people. So they have staged this thing in order to justify actions to be taking place in fucking Iraq. And why are they doing these actions in Iraq? Why are they doing these actions in Iran? Why now? I think I know why now. Let me just make sure we are recording still. We are good. Okay, so out of nowhere, Daesh, ISIS, with their fucking PR image in front of a goddamn green screen. I think this is the same background they used on a couple of the beheading videos too. So fucking stupid. Here's the drone strike in U.S. occupied base in eastern Syria. Several U.S. service members have been reportedly injured, quote unquote injured, in a drone operation against a military base in Syria's eastern province in Deir al-Zawar, as anti-U.S. sentiments continue to rise in the region amid Washington's support for Israel's war on Gaza. Is that really the reason? Several sources, speaking on condition of anonymity, told the Arabic language services of Russia's Sputnik news agency, this is from Press TV, by the way, that the strike against the facility at the Al Omar oil field on Thursday night resulted in casualties and infrastructure damage. They added that U.S. military helicopters could be seen taking off from the base and headed northward to transport the injured to other bases and field hospitals belonging to the U.S. military. The Islamic Resistance in Iraq, an umbrella group of the anti-terror fighters, in a statement published on its Telegram channel, claimed responsibility for the drone strike on the U.S. military base. The group noted that the airstrike was carried out in retaliation for U.S. support of Israel's bloody war against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. They are based in Iraq. So that means the attacks, our resulting attacks will be in Iraq. Why is that interesting? The Iran-Russia deal, BRICS expansion spells dollar demise. Last week, Iran and Russia announced to have finalized an agreement to trade in their local currencies instead of the U.S. dollar. The agreement, signed during a meeting between the governors of the two countries, central banks in Russia, enables banks and economic actors to use infrastructures, including non-SWIFT interbank systems, to deal in local currencies. Both Iran and Russia are subject to U.S. sanctions, which have motivated the emerging allies to craft their own path in the global economy to break away from traditional monetary systems as countries around the world shift from the greenback. In recent years, Russia and Iran have stepped up oil sales in alternative currencies and found buyers in China and India and elsewhere that are happy to buy these exports, often at a lower price, because paying in a domestic currency rather than dollars lowers the transaction cost. Last October, the Royal Bank of Canada reported 25% of Russian trade with countries other than China were settled with the Chinese yuan. U.S. dollar's dominant role in the international monetary system has enabled the country to act as the world's watchdog and use threats of exclusion from the dollar-based financial system as a political leverage against the nations which it does not see eye to eye with. Seeing a risk that Washington could act similarly against them in the future, other governments have also moved to reduce their dependence on dollar payments. Other countries like BRICS, like Iraq. 2023 has seen the announcement of a spate of invitations for potential ascensions to BRICS, an emerging economic and geopolitical bloc currently comprised by comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. On the heels of this, a number of other countries are joining in, are looking to join, and Iraq is one of them. Iraq is one of them. That's what this is all about. Daesh is based out of Iraq. Now that there's been this attack in Iran, trying to drive a wedge between Iran and fucking... But the Iranians aren't buying it, but that's not why they're doing it. Once again, we're using our fucking proxies, which, by the way, didn't really even exist in Iraq. They did in fucking Syria. When you look at... I've explained this before, I'll do it one more time. When you look at, if you pull up there, and if you look at my, American Gladiator thing, and not American Gladiator, but if you look at ISIS, for instance, as a category of my thing, you can scroll down, you'll find links to our special operations field manuals for unconventional warfare and irregular warfare. Basically, destabilization campaigns using proxy armies, terrorism, kidnapping, bombings, things like that. The Gladio things back in the days that we did in other countries after World War II, when we were afraid they were going to lean too far to the left. We had to curb that, so we had these stay-behind armies. That was really the foundational beginning of all of this. Now, they may have done it before World War II in other countries. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe even Smedley Butler was involved in some of these fucking operations way back in the day. He said he was a fucking gangster for fucking capitalism, so he probably did. But he did what he did and redeemed himself later. So that was good on him. But here's how these things work. There's two types. There's a support and there is a destabilization. ISIS was destabilizing in Iraq in support of our efforts in Syria to take the area east of the fucking Euphrates River, to drive people out, Syrians out, to allow the Kurds to come in and take it by chasing them out, wink, wink, and then go on to the next one. There were so many incidents I covered back when I was covering fucking Barack Obama and this shit back in the day, where there were cases where ISIS would go into a village or town in Syria, usually east of the Euphrates, because they're trying to bust off that half of that third of the country and hand it over to the Greater Kurdistan Project. They would go in and they would attack a village or a town, and then, of course, along would come the Kurdish, the best fighters of ISIS, the Kurds. They would come along with the U.S., and they would surround the town, and then they would convince ISIS to leave. There were videos of them leaving on buses. They would put them on buses, and then they would literally drive to the next fucking town with a string of fucking buses, and the greatest ISIS fighters, the Kurds, the Syrian Democratic Forces, would just let them go. And they would go to the next fucking town, next village, do the same goddamn thing. And then the Kurds would come and they would surround the town and they'd say, okay, you got to go. And off they would go to do the same thing, right? They were just straight up fucking, they were our destabilization proxy army. They existed. They were driving around these Helix trucks for a long time. They existed in Syria. In Iraq, they never really did. They might have done some kind of terror acts here and there, some little small things like that, but they were probably a smaller group, maybe even the MEK, maybe even the Kurds at that time. But they didn't really, what existed was the General Military Council for Iraqi Revolutionaries. And we had to go bomb the shit out of them to keep Iraqis from taking Iraq back from our puppet. We didn't want another Ba'athist regime coming to power in Iraq in the vacuum after we left. That's what Daesh was. That's what ISIS was. And that's what they are now. That's what they are now. Now they're just taking, again, I'm not saying that Daesh, ISIS, these actors, these crisis actors dressed up in their costumes in Iraq and fucking Rita Katz's studio in New York, I'm not saying they went in to set off these bombs, but someone did. In all likelihood, it was MEK. And this is just cover for the MEK. The question is, why did they do it? Did they kill more Muslims because we're killing Muslims? That doesn't make any fucking sense. Why would they kill more Muslims in fucking Iran because they're pissed off the United States is helping Israel kill Muslims in fucking Gaza? Does that make any sense to anybody? No. There's a reason behind it. They need to destabilize the goddamn world island because the world island is taking shape. That's the fucking war. That's the fucking battle. We're talking about the Silk Road Initiative. We're talking about the Greater Kurdistan Project was part and parcel of that. Taking the best oil producing regions in those four key countries, Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. Taking the best oil producing areas in those things, handing it over to one country under our control, probably under the Barzani clan, who run fucking quote unquote Iraqi fucking Kurdistan, taking it over and controlling it, controlling the central hub of the world island. And of course, making it big enough so that you have access to the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, all the way down to the fucking Persian Gulf. That was a huge project, and it's still a big project. And they say, oh, shh, don't talk about Greater Kurdistan, shh. But, when I was talking about this 2-3 years ago, for even longer than that, during the fucking Obama days, Kurdistan, not Kurdistan, eKurd Daily. Somehow or another got wind of what I was writing about, and they did a series of exposés on me and saying how crazy I was. But, you know, all you had to do was just look around eKurd Daily and you find other articles where they had their own fucking maps of the Greater Kurdistan Project that were very similar to mine. But it's clearly what's happening here. And this is a big one. Now, was it kicked off? I think two things brought this about, this new conflict that's taking place, which is probably why we're getting people being misdirected to look over here at this or misdirected to look over there at this. World wars start on smaller fucking issues, on smaller conflicts. This is a big one. This is a big one. If people all fucking ditch the dollar, if the most important fucking countries doing the most important fucking, the most important commerce between them, energy commerce, if they ditch the dollar, then the masters of the universe are going to start hemorrhaging fucking profits. And with that, they're going to start losing control. And people are going to, other nation states are going to, as we see now, Iran, we see Iraq, we see all of these countries trying to say, you know what, screw this, we're getting off the fucking dollar. Brazil, we're getting off the fucking dollar. We're going to go with a different currency. We're going to create a new currency. Or we'll go with the yen, or we'll go with the ruble, or whatever the hell else it is. Or we'll go with using one of our own. We're going to get away from using the fucking dollar because this gives the U.S. too much fucking power. This gives the U.S. too much power in the UN to dictate to countries what's going to fucking happen in the world. To dictate who gets to bomb the hell out of civilians and create a fucking genocide when nobody else can except the U.S. and Israel. This is a big story. And what's happening in Syria with this quote-unquote drone strike, what's happening in Iraq with these attacks near Baghdad to take out the PMU leaders, what's happening in Lebanon was directly from the IDF. So that was Gaza and Gaza related strictly. But what happened in Iran with the attack on the memorial service and the parade for Soleimani. This is all part of something much, much bigger than Gaza. And it could very easily kick off into something much bigger. They can't lose control, lose their fucking grip. All of this, remember, all of this was the New World Order. The New World Order isn't just about big business dictating to countries what they will and won't do with their borders, with their workers, with their resources, with their rights, with their fucking jabs. That's not the only part of that. The other part of that is they need control. The reason they want this power is so they control certain things. And of course, the nation states that are opposed to us, that are standing in opposition in our way of giving up that control, they noticed where they went first and foremost with 9/11, the world island. And so they shifted their focus to the same place. And I think that's what's happening now. That's what caused the fucking Daesh or ISIS or fucking Rita Katz's fucking site intelligence fucking scoundrels to set off those bombs in fucking Iran. And that's what's happening with our attacking and ginning up justification for more attacks in Iraq, a country that we just decimated to start with, but still couldn't quite. We had to get out of Afghanistan because it wasn't worth it for us. The Trans-Afghan pipeline, that whole thing was dead in the water anyway. So we had to eventually get out of Afghanistan. But Iraq, we can't give up on Iraq. We can't give up on our control in Iraq because Iraq is right dead smack in the fucking middle. And if there is a power alliance between Saudi Arabia, Iraq, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, of course, and Iran, and the BRICS nations, we have fucking lost. They won't let that happen. They will light a fire in the Middle East, and they will blame it on Gaza. They will say that's what caused the whole thing, when that's got nothing to do with it. That's just the fucking cover. I keep looking into this story. I hope you guys get something out of that. This is my third video now. I get to close this video and go outside and get myself a treat. Thank you for your time.